Before we begin this journey, remember this. Every image you're about to encounter is symbolic, artistic metaphors meant to evoke thought, not define reality. This is not psychological advice, and it is not therapy. It is simply an invitation to reflect. You don't need to become stronger to deserve life. You only need to stop abandoning yourself. There are days that pass as if nothing has changed. You're still in the same room, still moving through the same routines, but somehow it feels like no one is truly there anymore. Your phone stays silent, no calls, no messages. People who once filled your life so effortlessly begin to fade, and some of them disappear quietly, without explanation, without closure. And then the questions begin. Did I do something wrong? Did I lose my value somehow? What's strange is that these lonely seasons often arrive right when you feel most ready to share your life with someone. That contradiction is not accidental. It's a quiet message from life, because sometimes the absence of others is not a void. It's a signal that something within you is beginning to shift, preparing to grow, preparing to leave behind an older version of yourself, a version not everyone is meant to walk with. Not every broken relationship is random, and not every fading connection is your fault. There comes a moment when life gently pulls you back toward yourself, so you can finally see what you've been neglecting while chasing illusions outside. In this journey, we explore a question. How do you stand firm in life when it feels like no one is beside you? It is not an easy path, but it is a necessary one. Because in silence, something begins to move slowly, invisibly, until the person who once felt left behind becomes so grounded that even life itself begins to rearrange around them. Not because others lift them up, but because they finally learned to become their own foundation. And here's the first thing to understand. When you feel like you have no one, it may not be loss, it may be protection. There's a truth very few people realize. The moments when you feel most alone, most misunderstood, most disconnected, are often not the worst chapters of your life. In fact, they're often the moments when your unconscious mind is quietly pulling you away from paths that no longer serve you, guiding you out of patterns that would have slowly led you astray. Carl Jung once suggested that the human soul carries a wisdom of its own, a wisdom that often operates far beyond conscious awareness. He wrote that when the unconscious is not brought into awareness, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So when you find yourself being pulled into unwanted silence, cut off from the familiar crowd, it may be that something deeper within you is keeping you away from something you are not yet ready to see. You may call it loneliness, but in truth, it could be a quiet turning point in your destiny. Many people believe loneliness is failure, a sign that you are not interesting enough, not attractive enough, not successful enough. But from a deeper perspective, there are forms of solitude that are not emptiness, but purification, a necessary clearing. If you look closely, the most profound transformations in life rarely happen in the noise of constant connection. They happen when you are left alone with the direction of your own life. Jung called this a kind of withdrawal, a purposeful retreat of the unconscious. It pulls you away from influences that quietly misguide you, even before your conscious mind realizes you're heading in the wrong direction. I once knew someone like that. He was always surrounded by people, always busy pleasing others, always maintaining the image of being easygoing, cheerful, and likable. But when he turned 30, everything collapsed. Friend groups drifted away. His career no longer felt right, and relationships faded. He told me it felt like the world had quietly erased his name. But months later, in the stillness he couldn't escape, he began to see something clearly for the first time in his life. His old way of living had been draining him for years. He had lived so deeply inside other people's expectations that he no longer knew where he was going, or even why he was living at all. And in that moment, his unconscious pulled him away, not as punishment, but as protection, to keep him from dissolving completely into a life that was never truly his. What he once called loss was, in truth, a quiet act of preservation. Being separated from others will always feel uncomfortable, because humans are built for connection. But as Jung reminded us, the unconscious does not care about your comfort. It cares about your safety. When an environment, a group, a relationship, or even a rhythm of life no longer aligns with your inner growth, the unconscious will begin to create distance. You begin to feel tired, disconnected, out of place. It becomes harder to fit in, harder to pretend that you still belong. You don't understand why you can't keep walking the same path anymore. You only know that staying is exhausting you. And more often than not, that is the first sign that you are being guided away from something that could harm you later. Imagine yourself moving within a fast-paced crowd. Everyone is rushing forward, pulling you along, making you believe this is the rhythm you're supposed to follow. But then you begin to lose your breath. Your steps falter, your heartbeat rises, and suddenly there is a quiet force, firm but not violent, resting on your shoulder, gently pulling you away from that current. You step out of the crowd and come to a halt, and all at once, the world becomes unnaturally still. In that moment, you think you've been left behind, but in truth, you've just been removed from a chaotic race you didn't even realize was dangerous. You may feel empty, displaced, as if you've been pushed outside the edges of society. But ask yourself, what within you is being protected? What is it that you haven't seen yet? What must you step away from in order not to lose yourself? This retreat may be the beginning of a different kind of growth, one that doesn't come from being supported by others, but from a clarity you've never had before. And sometimes, right at the moment you believe every door has closed, your unconscious quietly opens another path, a quieter one, a lonelier one, but one that is safer and far more aligned with the direction your life truly needs. Let the separation be a reminder that you are being guided even when you cannot yet see the destination. If you've ever lived through a moment when life quietly pulled you away from the crowd, you might recognize this feeling. Perhaps you don't need to explain it in detail, just that subtle realization that you weren't truly abandoned, but gently redirected. And maybe your story, however small it seems, could become a light for someone else still wandering in their own confusion. And then, when there is no one left to lean on, something else begins to shift. You start to see that the very traits that once helped you survive within the crowd are the same ones that confined you for so long. Loneliness doesn't just separate you from your old environment. It separates you from the roles you've been playing for so long that you began to mistake them for who you really are. This is the moment you are forced to face a difficult truth. Much of what you once called yourself is, in reality, a collection of constructed layers identities shaped for survival. Masks formed early on, to be loved, to avoid rejection, to belong to a world that, deep down, you never truly felt at home in.
Carl Jung described the psyche as a complex structure formed through the interaction between the individual consciousness and society. Every time you act strong, so you won't be seen as weak, cheerful, so you won't make others uncomfortable, overly kind, so you won't be abandoned, or successful, so you can escape judgment, each of these becomes a piece of that structure. When you are surrounded by others, your identity is supported by their reactions, expectations, and perceptions. You exist through reflection. But when you step into your own silence, that structure begins to fracture. There is no one left to perform for, no audience, and the mask that once helped you survive quietly falls away. I once knew someone who lived this reality. To everyone else, she seemed strong, full of energy, and effortlessly warm. But when her marriage ended, when her closest friends drifted away, she found herself in a long, unfamiliar emptiness. And in that silence, she realized something terrifying. She no longer knew what she truly liked or who she was without someone there to reflect her image back to her. Every choice she had ever made, from how she dressed to how she lived, to what she believed she wanted in the future, had been shaped by the expectations of others. And when the noise disappeared, she realized she didn't know how to exist as herself. She only knew how to exist as someone others could accept. That moment is like standing alone in a white room, facing a mirror that stretches from floor to ceiling. In the crowd, your image is always distorted by the gaze of others. But when it's just you and the mirror, the truth becomes unbearably clear. You no longer see yourself through a surface polished by social expectations, but through the raw, unfiltered landscape of your inner world. And sometimes, that truth is powerful enough to make your heart tremble. People often mistake the collapse of their outer shell for loss. But in truth, it is more like removing a suit of armor you've worn for so long that you forgot it was slowly exhausting you. While you were wearing it, you believed it made you strong. Only when you take it off do you realize how tired you've truly been. When that shell falls away, you haven't lost anything. You've simply reclaimed the space to finally see the person who has been hidden beneath it for years. It is a truth that is both painful and beautiful, because it offers you one of the rarest gifts, honesty with yourself. You may feel disoriented when the roles you once relied on no longer work. You no longer know what to say to be loved or how to act to keep others satisfied. But that very disorientation is a sign that you are stepping into the territory of inner freedom. The people who only connected with your mask will quietly disappear. And those who come into your life after this phase will recognize you not because you perform well, but because you are real. If the previous stage was your unconscious pulling you away from the crowd to protect you from a misaligned path, then this stage is where you begin to reclaim authorship over your identity. You don't need to control this process. You only need to allow it to unfold. Because this shedding is not here to weaken you, it is here to return you to the original shape life intended for you from the very beginning. And in that stillness, you begin to notice something you once overlooked. The feeling of simply being human without strain, without having to bend yourself to fit into anyone else's gaze. There comes a moment when you realize that having no one left to lean on is precisely what allows you to stand on your own. From here, loneliness is no longer an empty void to be feared. It becomes untouched ground, raw, open, and honest, where you can begin to see yourself clearly. It is here that your true identity has the chance to take form in a way no crowd could ever shape. And when the darkness begins to surface, when there is no one left to blame, when you are finally left to face yourself, when the layers of personality fall away, and you stand alone in a silence you once avoided, a question inevitably emerges in that space. Who am I, really? What frightens many people is the arrival of the shadow, the parts of themselves they once ignored, suppressed, or denied. With no one left to lean on or project onto, the unconscious opens a deeper layer, and within it, the shadow begins to reveal itself. Carl Jung once said that people do not become whole by cultivating only the positive aspects of themselves, but by making the darkness conscious. In other words, you don't grow by convincing yourself you are better. You grow by having the courage to face the parts of you that feel shameful, wounded, or difficult to accept. Loneliness is not a sign of loss. It is the necessary condition for the shadow to appear. When there is no one around to distract you, you are forced to confront the true origins of your inner conflicts. I once heard a man describe himself as calm and rational. But when his marriage ended and his closest friends drifted away, he fell into a kind of emptiness he had never known before. His home became so silent that he could no longer escape himself. At first, he believed he was simply sad because he was alone. But after a few weeks, other things began to surface. Envy toward his brother, a fragile sense of self-worth, a deep fear of abandonment hidden beneath his optimism, and old wounds he had long believed he had already overcome. None of those things had ever disappeared. They had simply been concealed by the noise of a busy life and the presence of others. When everything grew quiet, his unconscious forced him to see them, not to punish him, but to give him a chance to truly grow. In many myths, the confrontation with darkness is always portrayed as a turning point of the soul. The story of Theseus entering the labyrinth is one such example. He could not bring anyone with him. The labyrinth was not merely a place of danger. It was a symbol of the inner world itself, a maze of dead ends, memories, fears, and rejected instincts. And only in solitude could he face the raw, primal, and often terrifying parts of himself. When the Minotaur is defeated, what is overcome is not just a monster. It is the fear that once ruled from within. In the same way, when you step into solitude, you are stepping into your own inner labyrinth. Jealousy, anger, insecurity, fear of abandonment, disappointment in yourself, painful memories, shame you thought you had buried. Everything begins to surface. These are not interruptions. They are unfinished lessons you were meant to grow through, but once avoided. In relationships, there is always someone to blame, someone to distract you from your own emotions. But when you are alone, every feeling returns to its true origin. You stop saying, "It's because of them," and begin asking, "What does this say about me?" And in that question lies the doorway to your deepest growth. You begin to see that envy points to the dreams you abandoned. Insecurity reveals wounds that never healed. Anger conceals pain you never allowed yourself to feel. And when you start to see these not as problems to hide, but as messages to understand, a different kind of strength begins to emerge. It is quiet. It does not need to prove itself, because the strength that comes from knowing yourself will always outlast the strength that depends on being recognized by others. This is the moment you stop reacting blindly to life and begin to live with awareness. And it is here that you start to understand why life sometimes seemed to abandon you.
It was never to break you. It was to show you what you would never have had the courage to face, while someone else was there to shield or soften it for you. If something in these words resonates with you, if you feel that darkness is no longer an enemy, but a doorway, you don't need to explain your story. You don't need to justify anything. Even a single word left behind, something as simple as awake, can become a quiet marker for yourself. A moment when you found the courage to face what you once avoided. When there is no one left to lean on, no one left to reflect you, no familiar structure to hold on to, you are forced to ask a different question. What truly supports me? Jung saw this as a threshold of inner maturity. Not when you are guided more, but when you no longer have any choice except to stand on your own. If the earlier stages stripped away what you once believed to be your sources of strength, then this is the stage where a new kind of strength is formed. Inner power does not come from advice, protection, or validation. It only appears when you are forced to find your own answers. When no one is there to tell you what to do, the mind turns inward. As Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakens." A woman once shared that most of her life had been shaped by the decisions of others. Her family chose her path in education. Her environment shaped her interests. Her work dictated the rhythm of her life. She grew used to seeking approval before making any decision. It was only when the people she relied on were no longer there that she found herself facing her own life for the first time, with no one else to take responsibility for it. One evening, standing in front of the simplest choices, she realized something unsettling. She didn't know what she wanted if no one was there to guide her. And in that moment, she began to listen inward. Instead of asking for opinions, she chose what made her body feel less tense, what allowed her breath to deepen, rather than what others expected her to choose. A year later, she said she hadn't become stronger. She had simply stopped seeing herself as someone who needed to be led. Her inner power emerged the moment she stopped handing her life over to others and began to trust the intelligence within. The most fitting image for this stage is a compass. When you are in the crowd, you follow directions given by others. But when you are alone, you are forced to use your inner compass for the first time. At first, the needle trembles. It has never been trusted before. But the more you rely on it, the steadier it becomes. And then you realize it was never broken. It was only drowned out by noise. When you begin to follow it, the feeling of being lost slowly disappears. Not because the path becomes easier, but because you finally know what you are walking toward. Modern neuroscience also suggests that during periods of solitude, the areas of the brain associated with self-awareness and independent decision-making become more active. When social signals fade, the mind is forced to rely on its own internal evaluation, strengthening your ability to self-direct and lead yourself. So inner power is not just an abstract idea. It is a real biological and psychological process. It only activates when you are forced to stand on your own. And what's remarkable is this: it doesn't form in noise, but in silence. When there is no one left to ask, no one left to rely on, you begin to hear yourself more clearly than ever before. You cannot recognize your inner voice if you are constantly searching for answers outside of yourself. Real strength emerges in the moment you understand that every piece of advice, every direction, every answer must ultimately pass through one place: your inner feeling. And only when you trust that do you truly begin to live your own life instead of a version shaped by others. From that point on, you are no longer someone being pulled along by the world. You become the one who leads your own path. This is the true turning point, not when you know everything, but when you stop betraying yourself, when you no longer silence your inner voice just to satisfy the expectations of the outside world. Real maturity begins here. It is not loud, it is not performative, it is simply a quiet steadiness, a state where you are no longer shaken by every emotional wave, every opinion, every passing judgment. You no longer feel the need to prove anything, and because of that, you become stronger than ever before. From this foundation, everything in your life begins to shift. Your relationships grow deeper, not because you seek validation, but because you seek resonance. Your work becomes clearer, not because you chase expectations, but because you follow direction. Your dreams become more grounded, not because they shrink, but because they finally reflect what you truly want to live. Life does not become perfect. It becomes aligned. And anything built from within is far less likely to be broken by what happens outside. When you accept your own path, life begins to rearrange itself. When you release your grip on old trajectories, things start to move. Not because the world has changed, but because the way you stand within it has. Jung described this as a kind of realignment, when your inner rhythm shifts and the outer world slowly follows. He once wrote that your vision becomes clear only when you can look into your own heart. When you are no longer bound by old patterns, the unconscious begins to adjust the course of your life towards something more aligned with your true nature. And often, the first thing that happens is not progress, but dissolution. When you lose a relationship, you also lose the habits tied to it. When you leave an environment, you lose the roles it once required of you. And when the familiar noise no longer fills your days, the illusions that once made you feel safe begin to fade. But this sense of loss is not collapse. It is space. Space that allows your life to be rebuilt on a deeper foundation. What once pulled you away from your true self will slowly fall away, and what truly belongs to you will begin to appear, without force, without effort. I once met a man who came to me for advice. His life revolved around the rhythm of his friend group, the same gym schedule, the same restaurants, the same conversations repeated night after night. But when those friends began to move away, get married, and drift into different lives, that shared rhythm dissolved, and he found himself in a silence he had never imagined. After a few suggestions, he started running in the mornings, something he once believed he disliked. He picked up photography, not because anyone told him to, but because something about it pulled him in. He stopped clinging to meaningless gatherings and began spending time on things that genuinely nourished him. A year later, he told me his life had never felt clearer. Not because he was more successful, but because, for the first time, his life no longer depended on anyone else. His trajectory had shifted, not through force, not through effort, but simply by returning to the right direction. Many well-known figures have gone through similar periods of solitude. J.K. Rowling, before becoming one of the most influential writers in the world, lived through divorce, poverty, and deep isolation. She once said it was a time when she had nothing left to lose, and in that emptiness, only one thing remained, a need that came from within. To write, not to be recognized, not to impress, not to meet anyone's expectations. but because she simply couldn't not write. From that inner necessity, her entire life was realigned. Her career, her place in the world, the recognition that followed. And it all began the moment she accepted her own path. When life begins to rearrange itself, you start to notice something. You are no longer acting from fleeting emotions, but from a deeper pull. Jung might call this an inner necessity, not a passing desire, but a quiet force from the unconscious, guiding you toward what truly belongs to you, even when no one else encourages or validates it. And as you move with this new rhythm, your life begins to shift, quietly, gradually, but undeniably. So if you find yourself asking how to move forward during this phase of reconstruction, the answer is simpler than you think. Let life show you the next step. Pay attention to what still carries energy within you. Pay attention to what still carries energy within you and what has quietly drained away. Then act accordingly. Try new rhythms, even the smallest ones, and allow them to gently pull you out of habits that no longer serve you. When you accept walking this path alone, you allow life to realign you through subtle, natural signals. Signals you can only perceive if you are quiet enough to notice them. And if you listen to that inner rhythm long enough, you will begin to see possibilities that were once hidden slowly unfold. When you are moving in the right direction, something else begins to appear. Alignment. Things that once felt random begin to fall into place. A meeting at the right moment. An opportunity that appears without warning. A door opening when you've stopped trying to force it. And you realize that these moments only emerge when you release your grip and begin to live in accordance with your inner rhythm. Jung called this meaningful coincidence, what many people simply call luck. But it is not magic. It is the natural result of your inner life and outer reality beginning to align. When you are no longer pulled by the crowd, you begin to notice signals you once overlooked. I once heard a story about a woman who left a stable job because it was draining her completely. She had no clear plan, only the certainty that she could not continue living the same way. One evening, while sitting alone in a cafe as rain fell outside, she overheard a conversation about a project that matched the skills she had quietly been developing. Weeks later, she became part of that very project, a turning point that reshaped the entire direction of her life. That opportunity did not appear while she was still clinging to her old life. It only arrived after she chose to walk alone and stay true to her path. That is the nature of alignment. It is not a reward for waiting. It is a response to living in truth with what is unfolding within you. This phenomenon emerges when you stop resisting reality and begin adjusting your life to meet it. A simple image for this is the synchronization of fireflies in nature. At first, each one flashes in its own rhythm, scattered, chaotic. But when the environment becomes dark and still enough, they begin to pulse together, without any central signal guiding them. Human life moves in a similar way. When you quiet the noise within, when you stop reacting impulsively and chasing outdated pressures, your actions begin to align more naturally with your true capacity and your real circumstances. You do not create alignment, you become aware enough to recognize it and follow it. From a scientific perspective, there's nothing mystical about this. When you step out of automatic living and begin making decisions based on personal values rather than social habit, the parts of your brain responsible for pattern recognition and meaning-making become more active. You begin to see connections that were always there but invisible to you before. Not because the world changed, but because your attention did.
Science calls this heightened perception.
When your inner world becomes clearer, you no longer feel pushed forward unconsciously. Not because someone is guiding you, but because you are no longer in conflict with yourself. And what's interesting is this alignment does not necessarily remove loneliness in the traditional sense. It does not bring someone in to fill the empty space, but it gives you something else, a quiet certainty that even though you are alone, you are no longer going in the wrong direction. The doors that open are not meant to take you back to your old life. They are there to lead you forward. Many people think they need to understand alignment for it to appear. But more often, the opposite is true. It only shows up when you stop trying to control everything, stop forcing yourself into patterns that no longer fit, and begin to live in sync with your own rhythm. If you want to recognize these signs, then in your loneliest moments, pay attention to what repeats quietly. The thoughts that are not loud but persistent. The choices that bring a sense of ease rather than tension. The paths that open without you having to force them. Alignment never shouts. It simply nods. And once you begin to notice those quiet nods, a deeper question emerges. If none of this is meant to bring someone back into your life, then where is it leading you? And in that moment, you begin to understand. Loneliness was never meant to punish you. It was preparing you to become someone you can finally rely on. This is the peak of psychological growth, the point Jung saw as the most important threshold. The moment a person stops searching for support outside and begins to stand firmly on their own inner strength. As he once said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." This is not about forgetting your wounds. It is about reclaiming your right to choose. Your right not to let the past define who you are. Your right to become your own foundation. Your right to feel whole without needing validation from anyone else. And when you truly understand this, loneliness is no longer a threat. It becomes a foundation. Not the foundation of isolation, but the foundation of a self that can stand again, no matter how life shakes you, like a tree growing in harsh terrain. When it is young, it needs shade, rain, and protection. But when those supports disappear, it is forced to grow its roots deeper to survive. And because of that, it stands through storms, not by luck, but because it learned how to sustain itself. Human beings are no different. When the supports you once relied on disappear, you are forced to reach into your true core. Imagine facing a chronic illness while the people around you become absorbed in their own lives. No one abandons you intentionally, but no one is there when you need them most. At first, it feels like you've been left behind, but slowly you begin to adapt. You learn your body, you adjust your life. You care for yourself patiently, step by step. The change doesn't come immediately, but what appears first is stability. For the first time, you realize that even in your worst days, you can rely on yourself. This kind of growth is quite something only those who have truly been alone can understand. It is when you stop hoping someone will fully understand you. When you stop waiting for a hand to appear at the perfect moment. Because the longer you wait, the more you shrink yourself. And then one day, when you look back, you realize that what you once thought was loss was simply life
guiding you back to the one foundation that never left you: yourself. From that moment on, every time you fall, you know you can rise again. Not because someone taught you how, but because you have already done it before. You begin to trust yourself, not because others believe in you, but because you have seen what you are capable of. You begin to walk, not because someone is beside you, but because you understand that this path was made for your steps, and only you can walk it to the end. This is the moment you rise, not above others, but back into yourself. Not through applause or recognition, but through a quiet strength that frees you from fearing tomorrow. Not because someone lifts you up, but because you have become someone who can lift yourself without needing approval from the outside. And when you reach this point, you finally understand something you may have heard before, but never truly felt. You were never truly missing anyone. Because the one person you needed most, the one who can stay with you through every change, every pain, every lonely season, has always been within you, waiting for you to grow enough to recognize them. Every person who left, every silence that came, every door that closed. None of it was meant to make you smaller. It was all meant to return you to the true scale of your soul, wider, deeper, and stronger than you ever imagined. Your rise does not need witnesses. It is like the sun rising at the horizon. You rise not because the world gives you permission, but because you have given yourself clarity, honesty, and a strength you once searched for in others. If any part of this journey resonated with you, even just a small belief that you too can rise from within, leave a comment below as a quiet marker of your own awakening. And if you know someone who is silently walking through a similar season, share this with them. Some paths must be walked alone, but no one is the only one who has ever walked them. You don't need to become a stronger version of yourself to deserve life. You only need to stop abandoning yourself. Thank you for being here. We'll meet again in the next quiet corner of the human soul.